Good. Well, good morning and welcome to the February 27th Maryland Public Service Commission administrative meeting. Generally, we start out with adopting the minutes, but since only two of the three of us were here for the February 22nd minutes, we'll go ahead and postpone that. Madam Secretary, if you can make sure we make a note of that, we're not accepting the minutes right now.
I will do that, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Why don't we go ahead and proceed with the consent agenda?
On the consent agenda, we have 12 items. Item number 1 is Verizon Maryland LLC, filed on January 29, 2019, revised tariff pages. The company proposes revisions to access tariff, service tariff, PSC Maryland number 217, section 2, second revised page 4, effective February 28, 2019. Verizon, the second item is Verizon Maryland LLC, filed on January 28, 2019, notice of intent to withdraw services. I understand that staff would like to make a correction to their comments on this one.
Good morning, Commissioners. Margaret Tuberty on behalf of staff. I do have two corrections to our analysis. On page number 2, under the withdrawal of tariff services, the sentence, potentially 69 business customers could be impacted by the filing, should now read, potentially 10 wholesale customers could be impacted by the filing. And in that same vein, footnote 3 is also effective. It should read, instead of 68 business customers who utilize the reverse battery and ground start feature, it should read 9 wholesale customers.
Very good. Thank you. Do any of the commissioner colleagues have questions for these items, any of these items?
May I
Oh,
continue on?
oh, I forgot to read them. I apologize.
Sorry.
Okay.
No problem. Thank you. Item number 3 is the Potomac Edison Company, filed on January 23, 2019, revised tariff pages. The company proposes to make updates to the electric supply rates for residential SOS effective for service on or after June 1, 2019. Number 4 is the Potomac Edison Company, filed on January 23, 2019, revised tariff pages. The company proposes to update its electric supply rates for Type 2 SOS effective for service rendered on or after March 1, 2019. Item 5 is Delmarva Power and Light Company, filed on January 23, 2019, revised tariff pages. The company proposes to update Rider SOS standard offer service rider rates for Type 2 customers effective March 1, 2019. Item 6 is Potomac Electric Power Company, filed on January 23, 2019, revised tariff pages. The company proposes to update Rider SOS standard offer service rider for Type 2 customers effective March 1, 2019. Item 7 is Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, filed on January 24, 2019, supplement 625 to PSC MDE-6 Retail Electric Service Tariff, Rider 1, Standard Office Service, revisions to Type 2 rates in addition of scheduled RDSOS energy rates effective March 1, 2019. Number 8 is New Wave Energy Corporation, filed on November 30th, 2018, an application for a license to supply electricity or electric generation services in the state of Maryland. Item number 9 is Cushaw Hydro LLC, filed on January 18, 2019, change in ownership notice. Item number 10 is Meadow Lake Wind Farm 6 LLC, filed on January 24, 2019, an application for certification as a renewable energy facility for the Maryland Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard Program. Item number 11 is Maryland American Water Company, filed on February 6, 2019, revised tariff pages. The company proposes to revise the rates and rules governing the distribution and sale of water in Bel Air and other territory adjacent thereto, effective February 5, 2019. And item number 12 is Sandpiper Energy, filed on February 8, 2019. 3 negotiated contracts executed on January 19, 2019, effective February 2019.
Thank you. Now I will ask my commissioners if you have any questions about any of these items.
Yeah, I have some questions about number 10, the wind farm. Hello.
Good morning, Commissioners. Michael Jang on behalf of staff.
Good morning. So for the record, where is this wind farm located?
This is in Indiana.
It's in Indiana, and how big is it?
It is 61 turbines, so
61 turbines, how many megawatts?
200.4.
200.4. Do we know ballpark how much money that represents that will go to the state of Indiana from the state of Maryland?
The produced RECs would cost about $3 million.
About $3 million, and it's going to go out of Maryland's economy into Indiana's economy, at least theoretically.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay, very good. I think that's important for us to continually remind ourselves, because this money is going out of state. Our RPS was designed to build renewable infrastructure in this state, and yet 80% of the money is going out of the state's economy to other states as far away as Indiana and further points. So, and I just rhetorically ask those questions, and I will continue to do so to keep this in the fore of the discussion as we go forward on what we're doing with our renewable portfolio standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Any other questions on these items? If not, are there motions for the consent
Yes,
agenda?
yes, Mr. Chairman. I have several motions for today's consent agenda. For item number 1, I'd move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of February 28, 2019. For item number 2, I move that we note the withdrawal of certain detariffed services. For item number 3, I move we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of June 1, 2019. For items number 4 through 7, I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of March 1, 2019. For item number 8, I move that we grant the company a license to operate as an electricity supplier in Maryland for all customer classes and service territories applied for and recommended by staff. Direct the company to provide marketing and training materials specific to its Maryland operations to the Commission staff and Office of People's Counsel 30 days prior to utilization of the materials in Maryland, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. For item number 9, I move that we note the change in ownership. For item number 10, I move that we approve the application and issue a Renewable Energy Facility Certification Number. That we direct the company to establish a REC account with PJM GATS within 30 days of certification, and direct the company to file notice with the Commission within 30 days of any changes to the information in the application. For item number 11, I move that we accept the tariff revisions for filing with an effective date of February 5th, 2019. And finally, for item number 12, I move that we accept the negotiated contract for filing under rate schedule NCR, which is the negotiated contract rate.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. Is there a second?
I'll second it for the purposes of discussion, and the discussion is I'm glad that the seconder doesn't have to repeat that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted. All right, let's move to the administrative items.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On the administrative agenda, item 13 is Verizon Maryland LLC, filed on October 17, 2018, revised tariff pages. The revisions make changes to the miscellaneous service arrangement tariffs, PSC MD number 211, Section 14, transmittal number 1840, effective November 17, 2018.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jennifer Karras on behalf of staff. This item addresses a proposal by Verizon Maryland LLC to revise its 911 tariff to introduce a new rate element, selective routing with automatic number identification to 911 service providers. Public Safety Answering Points, or PSAPs, are call centers that receive and process 911 calls. Currently, Verizon provides 911 call routing as part of a bundled service to each PSAP in Maryland. Multiple PSAPs are served and connected to dedicated 911 selective routers and circuits. Maryland is in the process of transitioning its legacy 911 network to a next-generation 911 infrastructure, which is an IP-based network. Next-generation, or NG 911 networks are capable of handling new technology and communication methods, including data, text, picture, and video messaging. As part of the transition to NG 911, providers other than Verizon will eventually route and deliver calls to PSAPs. During the transition from the legacy 911 service currently provided by Verizon to Next Generation 911, service must be supported seamlessly, meaning that both services will need to be maintained to some extent until all PSAPs served by a selective router are transitioned to Next Generation 911. As Verizon has noted in its filing, PSAPs will face significant financial constraints in this transition. In response, Verizon's proposed rate unbundles services, which will allow PSAP to reduce the tariff charged payments it makes to Verizon during the transition. Verizon's proposed tariff reduces the rate charged by PSAP to PSAPs by 60%, from $125 as part of a bundled service to $50 per 1,000 records for selective routing with ANI, which is automatic number identification. Staff also attended and presented Verizon's proposal before the Maryland Emergency Number Systems Board's meeting in January, which is a public meeting, to allow for an opportunity for questions from counties and other parties in attendance. The Commission holds a position on that board. No one at the meeting raised any objections to the proposed tariff revisions. I also note that the Executive Director of the board, Scott Roper, is in attendance today. Staff recommends that the Commission accept the tariff revisions with an effective date reflective of today's administrative meeting and to file clean copies.
Thank you, Ms. Garris. Are there any questions for staff? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just, do we know, and it may be for the company, how long this transition from the legacy system to the new system is projected to take?
They can expand on it, but in general, they've let me know that it takes about 12 months, and that can differ varying on the transition and how fast the PSAPs do transition.
Will that have any impact on the federal requirement that the company maintain its legacy copper system?
I don't see any.
Is there any
direct
impact on that? In other words, transitioning to a new 911 system, is that a precursor to getting away from the requirements to maintain the old regulated system?
No, I don't see any direct correlation between them.
Okay, fair enough.
But I would let the company.
With that, why don't we go ahead and recognize the company? Would you like to introduce yourselves for the record?
Yes, thank you. Doug Smith, State Government Affairs with Verizon. I have with me Chuck Vick, Senior Manager, 911 Planning and Project Management. So Chuck could answer some questions if you have any.
Okay.
The first question, oh, I'm sorry, is there somebody else?
I'm sorry, I'm Scott Roper. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Emergency Number Systems Board, the 911 board for the state.
Great. Okay.
So the first question I had was what I asked staff, how long do you think this will take? They thought 12 months, is that right?
So that is correct in that typically it's 12 to 18 months per site that implements, but if you're asking about the entire state, it'd be hard to say that because it depends on when they get started. So our experience has been per PSAP 12 to 18 months from start to end. They could all do it concurrently if they had enough resources to do that, but typically we don't advise or see that happening.
So
it
what I'm
would be
trying
a
to
number of
figure out,
years.
sir, is how long is this transition going to last in the state of Maryland? I don't know if you can answer that, or maybe the numbers board can answer.
I can't answer that
Okay.
question for you.
Again, Scott Roper, the Emergency Number Systems Board. We're estimating the transition will probably take about 3 years. There are 24 counties, including Baltimore City and Maryland, that each maintain their own public safety answer point. They're each responsible for contracting next generation core services and an emergency services IP network. We have 4 counties that have currently contracted with a vendor. Those are Montgomery, Charles, Calvert, and St. Mary's. We have another county, Prince George's County, that's in the procurement process right now. Everybody else is analyzing the various vendors in the market. Montgomery County is probably the one that's furthest along. They were awarded funds by the Emergency Number Systems Board for the transition January of last year, and they're probably going to be live sometime during this summer. So it's about an 18-month journey for them. Again, in Maryland, there are 24 911 centers that are spread across 4 different LADAs. Each LADA has their own pair of selective routers. So just because one center transitions to a next generation 911 service provider, if their neighbors within that LADA haven't transitioned yet, some of these Verizon services will still be necessary.
at least part of the reason we have to the company is under mandate to maintain its legacy copper system is emergency services 911. That's part of it, not the whole thing. And I asked staff if there was any interplay or interaction between that mandate and this transition, and they think not. But
This is really just specifically affecting the 911 centers from the selective router to the center itself, and not actually residential or business customers.
okay, so it's not a precursor to abandoning the.
I can't speak for Verizon, but again, this tariff really only affects 24 customers in Maryland. Those are the 24 911 centers.
Can I ask Verizon the same question? Does this have anything to do with maintenance of the legacy copper system in Maryland?
Not to my knowledge, it doesn't.
Okay, that's a position of the company, fair enough. I'll just take that on the record. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you. As you mentioned earlier that there were 24 customers for this service. It's my understanding that they didn't raise any concerns about this potential new tariff. Is that appropriate to say?
Yes. As part of the board's duties and requirements, we go out to each county to inspect their 911 centers during the year. Those were done last fall after this tariff had been filed. And I've had the opportunity to sit down with each 911 director and explain what the tariff was looking to do. Nobody raised any objections to it, and most were grateful in that it's going to reduce some of their costs during the transition that they're responsible for. This was also presented at our public hearing, our public meeting in January, and the board and the counties had the opportunity to come in and make comments to staff, council, and to the board during this period, and nobody raised any objections.
Okay. Do we know if the counties, or I'll call them the customers, are they prepared to operate under this tariff? Do they have the appropriate equipment on their end to interface with it?
Yeah, there would be no change in their equipment. Essentially, what this does, and Verizon can perhaps speak more to this, it's disaggregating the services so those counties don't have to pay the bundled rate for things that they're not necessarily going to be using anymore, such as the camera trunks to deliver calls or certain selective routing services. So this would actually reduce their costs going over time, but it's not going to be there isn't a capital cost or change for them to do that.
Okay. And so as they are preparing to transfer over, then, is the current tariff will remain in effect and available to them until
Yes.
they are prepared to move over to the new one?
Yeah, that is my understanding.
I would also add that Verizon could add to this too, but the PSAP will have to submit an application to switch over to that new rate, and we discussed that at the public meeting as well. So, but Verizon has let me know that they're going to help walk the PSAPs through the whole transition process and when to switch over and submit the application.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct, and what Scott described is correct as well. The PSAPs will utilize the same equipment that they have in place today. They'll eliminate a number of the services that they're receiving from Verizon as they migrate, and we are unbundling this rate to provide them, the benefit of lower cost to them during that transition period when the camera trunks and the alley services and so forth are no longer being delivered from Verizon, but from their new next-gen 911 service provider in the transition period.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just interested to know how is the 911 surcharge on a customer bill? How is that applied, and does that offset any of these transition costs?
So probably Scott's going to be the best one to talk to you about specifics about your Maryland surcharge.
Okay.
So the Maryland surcharge is there's a state fee and there's a county fee that is put together as the surcharge on the bill. So of that, 25 cents comes to the state into the 911 trust fund, and that money is used for capital enhancements to 911 service in Maryland. So counties can make application with approval for the board for telephone equipment, recorders, emergency standby power, furniture. Things are those one-time costs, and the money is awarded based upon need and not input. So we can provide the same level of equipment from, Garrett County to Ocean City. Across the state, everybody can provide the same grade of service because of that. Then there's the county additional fee, which is set by legislation up to 75 cents. It's established by the county through whatever legislative process that they have, whether it's commissioners, a county council, what have you. That money, although it's collected by us, we remit it to the counties in proportion to how it's collected. So if a dollar comes in from Baltimore City, they get the 75 cents of that. And that money goes to offset their operational costs. So that's salary, benefits, recurring network charges, maintenance on equipment, things like that. So typically, in total, we take in about $52 million a year, with about $40 million going out to each of the counties. And that money can offset anywhere between 10 to 50% based on how much we collect from each county.
Okay, great, thank you.
What happens to the other 12 million?
So about 500,000 comes off the top that funds my office, my staff, and then the rest of it is awarded out to the counties based upon their application approval by the board for those capital expenses. So we typically award between $12 and $13 million a year for, again, phone equipment, logging recorders, emergency standby power, furniture, security for the PSAPs, anything that helps the counties meet their statutory and regulatory requirements for
Okay, so
operation.
you're ultimately paying it out to the counties anyway.
Correct.
You're not accruing some big fund.
No, the only thing I accrue is my paycheck out of that.
All right, fair enough. There was a time when the legislature and the governor were raiding pots of money like that should they build, and I just wanted to kind of make sure that wasn't built.
Yeah, so we have been lucky on that's not really been a concern for us, and we actually have to report to the FCC every year that we have not diverted any 911 funds to other non-911 related purposes.
Fair enough.
Some states have, we have not.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, but it does sound like this fund is sufficient at this point to maintain and upgrade our systems.
So today, yes. Moving forward in the future, not necessarily, but there is legislation in Annapolis that we had bill hearings on yesterday to address that.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? If not, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the Commission accept the tariff revisions for filing and direct the company to file clean copies of the tariff pages with an effective date of February 27th, 2019.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The last two items can be taken together, items 14 and 15. Item 14 is I'll just call them together. 14 and 15 is Maryland Solar 2 LLC and Maryland Solar 1 LLC, filed on October 3, 2018, request for approval of decommissioning plans, one in case number 9463, which is Maryland Solar 2, and the other in case number 9464, which is Maryland Solar 1 LLC.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Lloyd Spivak for the Commission staff. These are the requests of Maryland Solar 1 LLC and Maryland Solar 2 LLC, filed for Commission approval of the decommissioning plans for the solar generating stations authorized by the Commission in case number 9463 for Maryland Solar 2 and case number 9464 for Maryland Solar 1. The case number 9463 Maryland Solar 2 project will encompass 193 acres and will include approximately 82,000 to 85,000 solar panels. The case number 9464 Maryland Solar 1 project will encompass 249 acres and will include approximately 100,000 to 104,000 solar panels. The Commission granted the CPCNs for the project by orders issued on September 21st, 2018, each of which included conditions requiring the projects to file and obtain Commission approval of their decommissioning plans. Those plans are what has come before the Commission today for the second time. The Commission previously heard discussions surrounding the funding of Maryland Solar's decommissioning liability at the November 7th, 2018 administrative meeting and directed the parties to meet to determine if there was room for agreement as to how the expected liabilities could or should be funded. Maryland Solar filed its plans on November 29th, 2019, and the parties have engaged in ongoing discussions surrounding the revised plan. Although staff and PPRP are accepting of Maryland Solar's revised decommissioning cost estimates, there remains a dispute as to how to ensure that the decommissioning of the projects will be fully funded. Maryland Solar has proffered letters of guarantee from a company with a partial ownership interest in Arygis, that is the company developing the projects. PPRP has neither rejected nor endorsed that proposal, but demurred to the Commission's judgment. Staff has recommended that the Commission reject the proposal to use a corporate guarantee as security for future decommissioning costs, and direct that Maryland Solar provide appropriate financial surety in the form of a letter of credit or bond capable of satisfying all of the decommissioning costs applicable to the projects. Staff takes this position partly because the value of a corporate guarantee is largely dependent on the financial health of the guarantor, which itself cannot be guaranteed over what is likely to be the 40 or more year lifetime of the project. In addition, the income stream on which the applicants rely as a backstop to the guarantee is subject to uncertainty and even bankruptcy, in which case it might not be available at all. Whereas a bond or letter of credit rely on well-regulated third parties to provide the surety, the proffered letter of credit would be from a corporate affiliate, and there is no recourse to a third party. There is also the fact that while Maryland Solar has indicated who the guarantor would likely be, it has not stated that with certainty, and has declined to provide the detailed financial statements of the guarantor, arguing that we should rely solely on the prospective guarantor's credit ratings. Under these circumstances, staff cannot even fully assess the value of a guarantee now, let alone 40 years from now. Staff is also aware that at least some other state regulatory agencies have rejected the use of letters of guarantee to secure future decommissioning obligations, as has the Federal Bureau of Land Management, largely because of the ephemeral aspect of the letters of guarantee. Accordingly, staff continues to recommend that the Commission reject the proffered letter of guarantee as security for decommissioning and require Maryland Solar to submit a bond or letter of credit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Spivak. Do we have any questions first for the staff, if you'd like? Maybe I'll just go and begin, and then we can hear from the company. So I just want to be clear. So the staff is okay with the decommissioning plan. Since October, everything that was worked out as far as buried lines and that type of thing. Is that correct? So
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
and everyone is good with the estimates, the decommissioning estimates. Is that correct? I think there were somewhere between $2 and $3 million for both of those per project.
That is correct as
Okay.
well.
So it's just the instrument that is of concern.
That-
And I ask that because, the condition calls for either a surety bond, a letter of credit, but it also throws out the option of an alternative arrangement. Are there alternative arrangement that you could name that you'd be okay with that aren't those two that you say are preferable?
Well, the NRC, for example, allows a corporate guarantee, but it's in conjunction with a trust arrangement. And the trust arrangement, essentially requires funding to begin up front and to continue, over the course of time that the project is expected to be around. So, a corporate guarantee in that instance might be acceptable in conjunction with some sort of trust arrangement. There are ways you conceivably could make that, you could make a guarantee acceptable, or simply a trust arrangement without a guarantee, depending on how it was set up, could do it as well. So there are conceivably other instruments or methodologies. A cash payment up front is certainly a good alternative. You would discount it to the present value of whatever the expected liability.
Okay, so it's
so
not that
that
the staff are just looking for the best, but is it kind of binary? Either it's pass fail, or is there? I mean, is there a threshold that the staff has evaluated and analyzed and says this is where an instrument should fall?
I think it's a little less concrete than that.
Okay.
Because this is one of those things that you don't know until you see and get a full evaluation whether or not the option might be acceptable. You have to remember that these projects are expected to last 40 years or more. For the first 25 years, they have a contractual revenue stream already set up, or at least one of them does. So, I mean, you're trying to evaluate what's going to be good for funding purposes that far in the future.
Okay.
And that's one of the problems we're having with the corporate guarantee. I mean, yes, the possible guarantor that has been suggested is a company that currently appears to be financially sound, but 5 years, 10 years, 30 years down the road, we have no way of assuring that. Whereas, and a bond or a letter of credit from a third party at least gives you recourse to that third party. And it would be a third party that's a bank or, some financial company that's more heavily regulated than the proposed guarantor. So you have more certainty that way that the financial.
Okay. But you're not opposed
wherewithal
to corporate guarantees. It's just you're going to be more, I guess.
I think the way to put it is we're not necessarily opposed to a corporate guarantee in all forms. It's just that we haven't seen a form in this instance that we are definitely okay with, and until we do see that in some way, shape, or form, it's hard to say exactly what would suffice.
Okay, well, you've used the example of NRC and the trust fund that's created for nuclear decommissioning, but in recent cases, hasn't the state of Maryland accepted corporate guarantees, and specifically looking at the Constellation projects using Exelon as
right? I mean, I think what it comes down to is this is really the first time the question's been put before us, the commission and staff. I think PPRP has gone along with it in a couple of the previous decommissioning plans that you mentioned, but they weren't coming here. They didn't come here and ask for commission approval of specific guarantees, and this is the first time we've really had to evaluate the question. I think our answers would be the same. It's not, you need something more than just a bare guarantee, especially than just a bare guarantee of a company that you're not sure who they're going to be, and that you aren't being given the opportunity to evaluate their financials in full detail.
Okay, and just reading through some of the data requests, particularly on number 10, 11, 12, when the staff, sees statements like the provision of security is therefore absolute and non-viable, and those assertions, given that the commission has accepted Exelon as a guarantor for the Constellation projects, I mean, how does that stack up against again?
Well, we have to take that statement with a grain of salt. I mean, we have to imagine the what ifs and the parade of horribles, because you have to bear in mind that what we're looking to do here is protect the future interests of the residents of the state of Maryland and Charles County. We don't want them left holding the bag 40 years from now. We want to be sure that the money is there to cover whatever is needed to decommission these projects.
Okay. Well, let me stop and let my commissioners jump in.
I got a couple. So, I got a couple questions. Let me try to stay on the same line for a while, but I'm going to go to some other lines. So, a line of a corporate guarantee If that corporation goes bankrupt, where does that put that guarantee in terms of priority for recouping the money, as stacked up against all the other creditors?
Probably very low, because I don't know that that's, I mean, usually what gets priority in bankruptcy are secured creditors, and I'm not sure that that guarantee amounts to a secured line of credit.
Yeah, so it kind of puts the citizens at risk should that bankruptcy occur, way at the end of the line.
Right, and the same thing also goes for the stream of revenues from the project. I'm not sure what priority a bankruptcy court would give in directing that stream of revenues towards that decommissioning obligation. Probably fairly low.
And multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations go bankrupt not infrequently. It happens, right?
It certainly does happen, and it can happen even to companies that apparently have good credit ratings.
I mean, I think 12, 15 years ago, nobody would have predicted Westinghouse Corporation was going to go bankrupt. But they made bad decisions, which maybe, arguably bad decisions, or someone mismanaged something, or a project didn't go forward, and it caused the company to go bankrupt, right?
We have certainly seen major economic players go bankrupt.
Yeah. So our job then is, as you said, to protect the interest not of the company but of the citizens, right? You agree?
Yes,
Okay.
Commissioner.
Let me ask you this. Let me change tracks. What happened between November and now? I think we set a timeline in there of a couple weeks. Get back to us, and there was something filed, but there was a dead period of several months. What happened?
A lot of discussion, Commissioner, and a lot of back and forth on what a corporate guarantee might look like. Parts of this is even go into the range of settlement negotiations, so I have to be a little careful of what I say here in terms of what was going on there. But all those data requests that were appended that you've seen, those happened. All those questions were asked and answered.
Was there any concern that the commission kind of indicated a couple weeks, maybe we put it back on?
Yes, Commissioner. I mean, it was a concern, but ultimately, staff needs to get it right, and we were trying to, in a lot of ways, to accommodate this, at least to try and get our heads around a corporate guarantee and whether and see if there were any way what was being offered would be sufficient. Was there any way we could go ahead with it? And we just couldn't get there. But we were trying, and we were evaluating this all along, trying to figure out what we could live with, what would adequately protect those interests of the residents of Maryland and Charles County.
Okay, the buck sheet, the most recent version of it, says the sole question that remains in staff's view is the nature and timing of the financial security. But when we were here in November, we had a lot of questions about the plan itself, net salvage values and how you project that, and someone offering $10, which I found offensive and not in good faith, as a security. And where's all that? Where's all that in this?
And all that was part of what was being evaluated as well, but all of that ended up being satisfactory.
How? Tell me how, because it's not clear to me. Because we had a lot of questions about that, and they're not answered in my mind.
Right.
What happened to the
I
$10 good faith offer? Because that I found ridiculous. But
well, I think the number one thing is that much more realistic valuations have been put on what the decommissioning costs will be, and the net salvage has been excluded from those costs. So we're not really even looking at or be concerned with net salvage.
so they can
as part of
salvage
this
it.
equation.
They can salvage it decommissioning, and it has no bearing on this plan. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. There's
Okay.
no bearing on this plan or
Okay.
the cost estimates or the guarantee that's in the offering.
Okay. And how about the offer of $10? Is that out the window too?
That most definitely is out the
That's,
window,
that's
Commissioner.
good. That's a good thing, because, I got $10 in my pocket that could satisfy that. That wouldn't go very far amongst 150,000 citizens of Charles County, Maryland.
I mean, in fact, that's the whole reason we're here, because, not only was that not acceptable, but even the much broader offer that the company has made, at this point is still not quite what we're looking for.
Yeah. Why wouldn't I'll ask the company this, but I'm going to ask you your opinion of this. Why wouldn't the company just offer the line of the what's requested instead of trying to find a novel way to do this that doesn't seem to make anybody real happy?
Part of it, I think, is simply financial. I mean, it does cost something every year to maintain third-party instruments, and that does cut into the revenue flow from the projects. I'm sure that's it. Part of it, I think...
But hang on, let me stop you right there. But the trade-off of that is who carries the risk, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's a balancing act between risk and costs.
Very much so, Commissioner. And, another part of it seems to be concern for equal treatment. While we, meaning staff and the Commission, may not have made a formal decision to allow Exelon to use a corporate guarantee, we didn't stop that from happening either. And so I think these applicants at least have some concern that they be treated the same as everybody else, and if they're going to be subjected to something more stringent than a corporate guarantee, I think they would want other parties to be subject to the same level of restriction.
I understand that, but I also know that when I go to a bank, they look at my history of interactions with that bank in terms of how they treat me, and that Exelon and/or Baltimore Gas and Electric Company have a long history of interactions with some degree of credibility. Here we have parties unknown that may be the guarantor, right?
That's correct, Commissioner.
So there's a big difference in my mind, a big difference.
There is certainly a difference between the companies, but I mean, from our perspective, we were evaluating the finances of what we were being presented with, and it just didn't quite get there.
All right, thank you, Mr. Spivak.
Commissioner Linton.
Yeah, I guess I just had thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple of questions about GAF and its role in this project, and I don't know if staff is the party to answer all of them, but since staff did mention that they had some understanding about GAF's involvement in previous solar projects, I was just curious if you could tell us a little about what those were.
I actually don't have that information. Mr. Falconer, you might know a little more than I do. The one thing I can say is that GAF has taken a partial ownership interest in Arigis. I believe it's a 10% stake. So they have some vested interest in the success of the project.
Of this project.
Right, and it also, I guess you could say, it makes them at least somewhat of an affiliate of the developer.
Okay, so I mean, and it may be for the company to answer, but I'm curious as to what their role would have been in the other solar projects. Were they just 10% involved? Were they providing a corporate guarantee? What do we know, or is that?
We don't know what their level of involvement was. Okay. We know that they were affiliated with, I think it was...
Just for the record, could you go ahead and officially introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, yeah. David Vaccarezzi with Commission staff. We don't know their level of involvement in the other projects, but they are involved. I think it was three projects in surrounding states.
Okay, I'll save it for the company then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just one last follow-up. I believe PPRP suggested we might want to have a proceeding to maybe set the standards for financial instruments. Is that correct? First of all, I want to make sure all the paper I read that is correct. But is that something that staff would support? Do you think at this point that would be helpful? Because really right now all companies have to look at is what we've done in the past. And if we've accepted in the past a corporate guarantee, then that kind of leave some confusion in the air of what Maryland will accept or not accept?
It's something we might support. We've actually contemplated that option as well, but we're not. We haven't come to a conclusion on whether or not essentially rulemaking or a generic case would be the appropriate way to go forward on the issue. It may very well be, but it's also the possibility that each of these things are too individual to make a rule the appropriate answer. So we're still evaluating that. Is where we are on that possibility, but we're certainly open to it.
Okay, but again, I guess a concern out there for developers is, if some projects somehow slip through without, commission review of the guarantees, and others do have to go through that, and we have different standards. How do we reconcile that without some? Or how would you staff recommend we reconcile that?
That generally speaking, those are the grounds for doing a rulemaking, and that those are the reasons to do it. And so, I think, as I said, the question in our minds is whether we can write an appropriate and effective rule that will cover us in most, and if not all, then most or nearly all of the situations that are likely to come up. And as I said, that we're still not quite certain on, but I think as a general matter, certainly we're open to doing a rulemaking to do that.
Okay. All right, well, before we recognize the company, we do have PPRP at the table. Did you want to add anything?
Well, Steve Tolson, I'm counsel to the Power Plant Research Program. Commissioner Richard, you're correct. We wrote a letter on November 16th after the November 7th hearing in which we updated the commission on our efforts to try to resolve the issue. And in doing these discussions, my client basically concluded that this is a big issue that would be, at this time, a good idea to bring all of the stakeholders in together to a rulemaking proceeding or another appropriate type of proceeding. But it appears to me that the COMAR could be amended to add something addressing the decommissioning requirements. I agree with Mr. Spivak that these cases can be fact-specific, but I think it's possible to draft a rule that perhaps leaves a certain amount of discretion with the public utility law judge or the commission to to vary the requirements depending on the circumstances. For example, we have a case where we already, I think, accepted salvage value. There's one case on file with that. And then we realized there are no documented cases of a utility-scale solar farm or solar energy facility being salvaged or decommissioned. They haven't been around long enough, to the best of our knowledge, although there are some that have been around quite some time. We looked at other cases where so we thought salvage value was not a good idea. PPRP's concern about the use of a corporate guarantee, I think, has been pretty well covered by staff. That sums up a lot of it. We don't know 20, 30 years from now what's going to happen. And we've seen recent, Commissioner O'Donnell mentioned Westinghouse. Well, Pacific Gas and Electric, which serves 24 million customers in California, is filing for bankruptcy. Things happen that people wouldn't expect. The Rock of Gibraltar fractures into a lot of little pieces sometimes. So that's why we thought a rulemaking going forward might be the best idea, because we believe there is a need to be fair to the developers, to the residents of the counties and the county offices, to the state. There are a lot of stakeholders that I think have interests that could benefit from being aired in a proceeding like that. In this particular instance, I believe, as our letter stated, that Regis agreed to post a bond for this particular thing, and I believe that's going to be their position today, although I'll defer to their counsel. But that just covers this particular case, and as I'm sure the Commission is aware, the potential for the need or the desire to have more solar in the state going forward is very strong, and we could see a lot more CPCNs coming in, and we go through a lot of work on these CPCNs, and then when it's over, they have to file their decommissioning plans. As you can see for this one, we've spent quite a bit of time and effort after the CPCN was granted in September of 18, still trying to iron out these details. I believe if we had a rule to guide us that we might be able to do this. We're also aware, by the way, that there are now several counties who have enacted decommissioning requirements. for solar facilities. And so that raises the specter of having inconsistent application or counties that are requiring things that the commission doesn't or vice versa. Once again, if you brought MACO or somebody into a rulemaking proceeding, it would give them a voice, but then we could all reach hopefully an agreement on how to go forward. So that's what I believe PPRP believes is a smart way to go for the long term. In this particular case, if the applicant agrees to post a bond or a letter of credit, why then, as far as we know, the rest of the decommissioning provision is satisfactory.
Great, thank you very much. And as we discussed earlier, obviously the state has a very ambitious goal in renewables, and so we do need to get this worked out if we're going to get this
Could be
in-state
getting a lot
development.
more ambitious.
Yeah, exactly. So, are there any questions for PPRP?
Just out of curiosity, does Mr. Tolson, does the state have we have preemption on siting? Do we have preemption on decommissioning?
That's a very good question, Commissioner O'Donnell. In this particular case, for example, I believe when Mr. Moses was here back on November 7th, he indicated that Regis intends to purchase the property on one of these facilities. So you're going to have private property with private equipment on it, and if it ceased operating for 1 year, that would trigger the decommissioning provision. But it's entirely possible, we've heard in our discussions in the interim, that they would repower the facility, but that could take more than 1 year. And if they repowered it in a manner that raised its output, then they would have to get a CPCN, because that's one of the conditions. So there's a lot of different triggers.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering about from the perspective of the counties putting their own kind of constrictions on decommissioning.
Well, that's obviously also an issue that's currently before the General Assembly, and it's also now the Court of Appeals of Maryland has granted certiorari in a case to look at that issue. So the plenary authority of the Commission is intact at this point, to the best of my knowledge.
All right, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Commissioner Linton, any questions for PPRP? Right. Well, with that, why don't we go ahead and go to the company?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. David Bugelmans on behalf of MD Solar 1 and MD Solar 2, owned by Regis Energy. We've covered a lot of ground, but I'll summarize real quick. As Mr. Spivak indicated, after our first hearing in this matter, Regis updated its estimated decommissioning cost to remove salvage value in order to address the concerns raised by PPRP and the Commission. The result of that is for MD Solar 1, the estimated decommissioning cost is $2,817,210. And for MD Solar 2, the estimated decommissioning cost is $2,389,562. These cost estimates and the decommissioning plans themselves are not in dispute at this point. As Mr. Spivak indicated, and as we've discussed, the only issue in dispute is whether a corporate guarantee should be allowed under the conditions. Regis still believes that it should be allowed under the conditions. The first reason is quite simple. It's the plain language of the condition for both projects explicitly contemplates the corporate guarantee. This condition language was adopted by the Commission pursuant to an effective settlement. If parties disagree with that condition, the CPCN proceeding was really the correct context to remove the ability to use a corporate guarantee. The second reason, and we've also touched on this, is the fact that corporate guarantees are in place for several projects today in Maryland. They're projects owned by Constellation, the guarantor is Exelon. Regis was aware of this fact, and we were simply attempting to comply with that precedent. I checked the dockets for both those cases, and it appears that those plans were filed on the parties. And while there wasn't a formal approval process, the parties could have brought up an issue with the Commission if they didn't agree with the use of a corporate guarantee. So we do believe that that does stand for something. But notwithstanding all of this, at this point, Regis filed its initial plans in October. We're now at the end of February. It's really gotten to a point where Regis needs to move forward with these projects. And so for that reason, Regis is willing to post a letter of credit or bond for the projects. What I would propose today is the Commission could approve the decommissioning plans and the cost estimates, and then require one of those two forms of security be filed prior to the start of construction. That would remove the need for a further hearing in this matter. Regis would also like to make one additional point, and Mr. Tolson speak to this, and it's the idea for a rulemaking. Regis, back in November when PPRP filed this letter, supported this concept and still does. We simply think it's a good idea for all involved. Unfortunately, CPCN proceedings are multifaceted. There's a lot of issues, and they're just simply, in our opinion, not the correct forum to have wide-ranging policy discussions like this. There's a lot of different pressures. Projects are under pressure to wrap up the proceedings. There's usually settlements in these cases, so there isn't a robust discussion. A rulemaking would allow for that. We think the state would benefit from stakeholder input, both from the counties, from developers, and from other stakeholders. It would also, I think, benefit developers and avoid situations like this where there's shifting requirements, or at least it seems like requirements have shifted. For instance, here initially, the projects use salvage value. That was based off of past practice from projects. Now there's this issue with corporate guarantees. We think having those rules in place up front would benefit developers and also benefit the state because you would have that discussion. So we still support the idea of a rulemaking. Again, what's important today, I think, is approval of the plans, the estimates, and then a requirement to do the follow-up filing with the 2 forms of security. With that, I'll end now, and I'll answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just while staff consults, I'll tap dance because I have a question for staff. Thank you, Mr. Bugelmans, for your presentation. I appreciate it very much. So my question for staff is this. Considering that the company has basically come to your recommended requirement, what is staff's position now?
We can certainly accept the company's willingness to provide a bond or a letter of credit.
And their notion that we approve the plans now and require them to file that additional filing without hearing is adequate with
yes,
staff?
Yes, Commissioner. I guess that there is just one small caveat in that, ultimately, ultimately we'd have to see the form of letter of credit or the bond.
Well, okay, so that's why I'm asking this question. Are we approving this, or are we putting another choke point potential in here? What are we doing?
I think one of the things you should consider is...
Could you turn your microphone on, please?
I think one of the things you should consider is having a letter of credit or bond today and have that be potentially updated at intervals, 2 years, 5 years, whatever interval is appropriate.
I could add a bit to that. PPRP's condition requires the estimate to be updated every 5 years. So I think that's baked into what's on the books now.
That would be acceptable.
Okay, so I don't know what the commission is going to do because we haven't decided yet, but just see if there's some other questions.
Well, thank you. Are the parties willing to talk in advance to make sure that the bond satisfies the staff at PPRP and any other parties?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Great. Are there any other questions here?
So we have a recommendation that we're probably poised to deviate from, considering there appears to be settlement at the table. Even though we've been at this a long time, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what will should we change the recommendation in our motion? What would the motion be?
Well, that's where I'm thinking at this point. Now that we've resolved this issue for staff about the letter of credit, I was already in the feeling that we should just stick with the current standard of the state, and that is if you have a satisfactory corporate guarantee, that would have been sufficient for me. But I think now that they have come forward with this letter, I am I'm ready to accept that, and I believe that the condition would be to accept with the requirement that the letter be submitted prior to construction.
I think
It sounds like there's already an agreement to discuss amongst the parties.
I think the recommendation would at this point be to approve the decommissioning plan and require the company to provide a letter of credit or bond as security for the future decommissioning of the project.
Prior to beginning construction.
Prior to beginning construction.
Except the
Okay, I just wanted to clarify any potential motion, just so we can,
So I would support that.
I'd be supportive of that.
Commissioner Richard, one thing I want to bring up, in our letter of the 16th of November, I believe we said that if you did take a bond, that the commission should be designated as the bond obligee, because for the only bond that we're aware of right now for a solar farm, it's on the Hagerstown prison facility on state land, and I believe that's in excess of $2 million, and it names the Public Service Commission as the obligee. Because there is a question, and this again underscores why a rulemaking could be useful.
So in the case of default of the company, the funds then would come to the commission to disperse for decommissioning?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think you're right. Okay, well, are there any other questions at this point? I think we're, otherwise, go ahead, Commissioner Linton.
I had a, I'll hold it.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute recess to just confer and we'll look at what we might be able to agree upon for a motion. So why don't we just stand in recess until 11:15?
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Yeah, that was.
you want to do that first? Yeah. We'll go back on the record, and thank you. I think we have our motion that we're working on right now. We do also want to add, it won't be in the motion, but we'd like staff and PPRT to start getting ready because we would like to see a rulemaking on this subject. So again, we can provide some clear direction. So that'll be coming out more formally, but I'll just state from the bench that we think that this is important, so we don't have this type of confusion among developers in the state exactly what we require. Commissioner Linton, do I need to tap dance any more here, or would you like to? Okay, Commissioner Linton, I'll recognize you for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For items number 14 and 15, I would move that we approve the decommissioning plan submitted on November 29th, 2018, subject to the filing of a letter of credit or surety bond acceptable to the technical staff and PPRP, which would be filed prior to construction.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. With that, all business is completed. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Commissioners.